So we have an IoT sensor that sits on a frame and it slips over the top of the frame. It's taking in acoustics and temperature, and it's taking in all of the things going on inside the hive. And it puts it onto a platform that the grower and the beekeeper can see. It's in there. We like to get them in and going so they can acclimate, and then they're constantly learning. So it's giving transparency essentially without having to crack hives, without having to look at every single one for the beekeeper, for the grower.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Almond pollination is just coming to an end, and honeybee colonies will be coming back to the Pacific Northwest to pollinate our berry and tree fruits next month. Now, our growers are in the process of making sure they have enough colonies to adequately pollinate their crops. The number of colonies per acre of crop, or stocking rate, has been used by growers for decades to estimate their pollination needs. But not all colonies are equal. Some are large and some are vibrant. Our next guests are interested in delivering more value to growers and rewarding beekeepers by estimating not the number of colonies per acre, but the number of frames of bees per acre being used in pollination. Itai, Kanot, and Shelbi Perkins are with BeeHero, a precision technology company headquartered in Fresno, California. They integrate in-hive and in-field sensors to provide growers and beekeepers with, among other things, up-to-the-minute reports on the strength of colonies in pollination. Their platform has a lot of additional pieces, so I was really glad to catch up with them to learn more. So without further ado, let's dive deep in the world of data, sensors, and their application to pollination this week on Pollination. Well, Itai and Shelbi, welcome to Pollination.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're very glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're a grower who rents colonies, you no doubt know about stocking rates. In some sense, it's the unit of pollination a grower has to pay a rental rate for each colony. Is stocking rate a good indication of the pollination capacity a grower is getting from a beekeeper for pollination?
I think that on paper, the answer would be yes. There's definitely a correlation between how many bees you brought into the orchard and the capacity that's gonna be available um, to that orchard. But at the same time, I think that even though a lot of growers knows about stocking rates, there are a lot of questions about what is the correct stocking rate. I think in almonds is a good example for an industry where you have quite a lot of uniformity. But outside of almonds, we see a lot of different things, and people don't always know why they're getting the stocking rates that they're getting. In many cases, it's just because their dad did something before them, and his dad did the same thing before him, and they're just following the lead, I guess. And yeah, there's a lot of guesswork.
I suppose this question is it also bound up with, an extension publication came out in the 1960s and said 2 colonies per acre, but the varieties have changed, the density of the plants have changed, the bloom, that these stocking rate might not apply to all situations anymore.
Sure, it's not just that; it's also the prices of pollination have changed. You know, at the time when it was written, hives would go for $5 to $15 a hive, so it was a bit of a no brainer to get just 2 hives per acre. And everything else that you said has definitely changed, including the be- the the best practices that are used now to grow the crops. and crops are potentially, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the potential of an orchard nowadays is higher. The amount of yields that we're expecting from a land mass, from a unit, is going to be higher, and with that you potentially want to also change the stocking rates or the amount of bees that you get. And I will also say that counting the number of boxes is not necessarily a very good metric to understanding how many bees you're actually getting, because every hive is different. What's in the box is different than the hive next to it. And an 8 frame hive is not the same as a 10 frame hive, which is not the same as a 6 frame hive. And I think that more accuracy in that aspect can benefit the growers and the pollination process in general.
Shelby, do you have anything to add to this? Being in the Pacific Northwest, does this kind of resonate?
It does, and I think to piggyback off of what Itai just said, there's also a difference between 2 6 frames and a 12 frame hive. There's a lot of differences, and on paper, you would maybe not think that. As far as stocking rates and the industry changing, I come from a tree fruit background, primarily apple, and there has been so much change. I mean, when that came out, you know, I don't even wanna think about how many years ago the '60s were, but you could drive a school bus around an apple in the middle of an orchard. They were spaced totally differently. Now we're trying to utilize the acreage we have. There's trellis planting. There's so many different varieties. Those varieties have very different bloom times. I mean, Cosmic Crisp has been very, very popular, and their bloom looks very different than a lot of other varieties. So
So that needs updating, and I suppose you know w- coming back around to what Itai said about colony strength and the boxes. One approach to stocking rate is you follow the extension guide. It says 2 colonies per acre. Beekeeper develop, one beekeeper, they all deliver 2 colonies per acre, but one beekeeper has very, very strong colonies and another beekeeper has weaker colonies. And I suppose, you know, in some high value crops, a third party assessor will go around and look at colonies. And I know I had this experience was that when I was in southern Alberta for hybrid canola pollination, where the seed companies would have an assessor going through. Tell us about the process and how BeeHero technology is looking to do the same thing, to be able to communicate hive strength to the grower without having, somebody go through and actively open all the colonies.
so we have an IoT sensor that sits on a frame, and
One more time, a what sensor?
an IoT, Internet of Things. I learned that the other day. Asked my daughter about it. A little IoT sensor, it slips over the top of the frame. It's taking in acoustics and temperature, and Itai could elaborate further on all of the details, but it's taking in all of the things going on inside the hive, and it puts it onto a platform that the grower and the beekeeper can see. It's in there. We like to get them in and going, so they can acclimate, and then they're constantly learning. So it's giving transparency essentially without having to crack hives, without having to look at every single one for the beekeeper, for the grower, um, in a much, much simpler, hands-off more process. We do calibrate with hands-on inspections,
Hmm.
and we're doing that constantly every year and making sure that the accuracy is there. But overall, it's giving a really good window into what's actually inside the hive.
So Itai, so as Shelby was explaining, there's a sensor in the hive, and it kind of it gets a snapshot of the hive strength. We're talking frames of bees of the colony.
Yeah, so actually, I have one of those sensors here. I don't know, maybe some of the audience is going to be able to see the video.
Oh, excellent! There it is.
And this is the sensor right here.
Uh huh.
And this little thing is packing 9 different sensors on it. Actually, And
Okay.
we measure things like temperature, humidity, sound, vibration, electromagnetic field, a bunch of other stuff. And what we essentially do is we try to analyze the different patterns of behavior within the hive. So bees behave differently based on their experiences, what's going on inside the hive and their development. And what we're able to do is identify those patterns of behavior and somewhat translate them into a language that we all can understand, put it on a nice dashboard. The beekeeper gets their own version of it, where they can follow their hives year round and understand if there are any issues without even visiting the hives. And then on the other hand, once the hives are being deployed in a grower's orchard, the grower gets visibility into the similar information. The the dashboard itself is slightly different because one is directed for beekeepers and their needs, and the other is directed for growers and their needs. I think that it's not just so obviously when you bring an inspector to go through the hives and make sure the hives are good, it gives you some ability to understand what's going on. Obviously, there's a scalability issue with that. Normally, an inspector will go through 10 to 15% of the hives in the orchard, so you get somewhat of a picture, but it's not as accurate as looking at all of the hives. With our sensor, we do look at all of the hives, but I think maybe an even bigger advantage to our technology over using inspectors is the preparation, because we can track and monitor the size, quality, and so on of the colonies before they get into the orchard. So we can pick and choose the right hives for that crop, for that field, for a specific acre, and bring those hives for the pollination activity. So in most cases, when an inspector arrives into a field, it's basically done. Like, you're not going to be changing
Yeah.
lives in most cases. It might open a window for discussion over, like, okay, the quality is not there. Maybe I'm as a grower, am going to pay less because I didn't receive what I ordered. But every grower would prefer paying the full price knowing that they got the full pollination. And this is exactly what we're able to achieve, because like I said earlier, we're able to track and monitor the hives since before they come into the orchard. We're able to make sure that everything that goes into the orchard is up to a certain standard, and the grower is going to get every time the best pollination services available.
Okay, that's great. Just I want to come back to that in a minute, but what does a grower and beekeeper see? I imagine they pick up their phone or they log on to their computer, and there's some what kind of information do the two different groups get? I imagine you can, if you know where the colonies are positioned, you can estimate stocking rate.
Yeah.
As tell us, yeah, what does a grower see?
So once a grower, so maybe I should start a little bit earlier in the process, because once a grower signs on, there's an onboarding process that
Okay,
happens. In that onboarding process, what we do is we map every one of the orchards. We put polygons on a map, and then we define the placement or drop points for the hives. Sometimes growers have some preferences based on what they've done in the past. Sometimes they want us to define new drops based on our knowledge and experience. But in any event, at that point of the onboarding, there's a pretty nice tool that we designed where you can draw the polygon on a map and then decide where you want to place the hives. You could put different instructions for the bee mover. Like, this is where the gate is. This is the code to open the lock. I don't want you to
wow,
drive on this road because it's, you know, whatever. You can put a lot of information on it to reduce the friction. And once the beekeeper or the bee mover gets there with the hives, they get all that information on their app, and they can make sure that they follow exactly the instructions of that grower, which is really, really great and reduced a lot of the friction we used to have in the past in the deployment part of the pollination cycle. Now, once the hives are deployed, the grower gets a pretty nice platform that shows them a bunch of different metrics. So one of them would be, and maybe one of the most important ones, is what are the committed frames per acre. We do things a little differently. We don't sell hives per acre. We go by frames per acre, since
Huh.
this is a more accurate representation of what the field actually needs. We help the grower understand what should be the desired number of frames for that specific orchard. We make recommendations based on that. And then we make sure we deliver the exact amount of frames or more. It's never going to be less. And and so the first thing that they'll see is the committed number of frames versus the actual amount of frames right now. In most cases during pollination season, you will see this number change. Hives develop and grow during that time. In some crops, it's the other way around, but we deal with it in a different way. But generally speaking, you can see the amount of um, frames per acre committed versus the amount of frames per acre actual right now in the field. Then you have like a gauge that tells you the activity levels in the field. So we this is basically a score between 0 and 100 that tells you how active the bees are between 0 and 100. It's not actual number of bees coming in and out of the hive, but it's again a score.
Mm.
They can also see some weather information. They can see a graph where with all the information aggregated together with weather information. So you'll see bee activity over time. You will see a number of frames over time. You will see flight hours on a daily basis, actual flight hours that are measured according to when the bees started their activity that day. So it's accumulated for every specific day. And you can also put wind, rain, temperature on that graph and see how they affect the bee activity. So when there's a very windy day or a cold day or a rainy day, you will see a less activity of the bees. And you can compare different days. You can compare different weeks. If you've been with us for a while, you can compare this year to the previous, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, you can see the distribution of hive strength in your orchard. So you will see you have 20% of the hives are between 6 and 8 frames. 40% of the hives are 8 to 10, and then 40% of the hives are 10 to 12, or whatever the distribution really is. But again, we try to provide a lot of transparency, and then you can look at a map, you can see where the drop points are, you can click on every drop and see the average strength of the hives in that specific drop and compare it across the board, and so on and so forth. So again, just a lot of information that in traditional pollination is not available at all. And here the growers are going to have it 24/7, the tip of their fingers.
I can just imagine how great that is, especially when you've been working for multiple years. You see, oh, I had a flush of bees and there's a lot of flowers this year, and I can it helps piece things together logistically. And I guess another thing I'm interested in, I think many people would be interested, is how does the business model work? So, Shelby, if a grower does a grower pay for this, or is it beekeepers an added on service? Like, how does this work?
Kind of a complicated question. The way it works right now, the way it works in California and almonds is nobody really pays for the tech. The tech is free. The growers pay us, they pay by frame, and then we support our network of beekeepers and pay them directly as well. As you said, I've been here in the PNW, and so we opened this market fully last fall. And so that's been a little different. We found in apples and cherries through market research that a 12 frame hive might not be the solution that they need out here because swarming and those type of things look a little different.
Mhm.
But our traditional model is as I said in almonds, the growers are able to select by frame, get exactly what they would like, and then our beekeepers are paid directly from us.
So I imagine a beekeeper with a stronger, who's consistently delivering a strong colony, and even I was thinking about Itai's, the even colonies. They're just, they come in, they're always consistent. They would get rewarded in terms of they would just get more. They're really getting a reward for it. And where in the current pollination model, especially in the Pacific Northwest, strong or weak, you're getting the same amount. So those strong colonies aren't really getting rewarded.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're doing differently is paying a differential price based on the strength of the colony. So yes, like you said, beekeepers that can consistently deliver strong hives are able to make better money for their hives. They can monetize their hives in a better way by working with us. And the growers, they don't really see the difference. Growers, we have a standard price per frame, and the more frames they want, the higher the price is going to be. Just because the price per frame stay the same, but
Yeah.
acre it goes up with the amount of frames per acre that you want, and it doesn't change based on what we delivered. We always make sure that we'll deliver exactly or above. So if somebody wanted 12 frames per acre and we delivered 13, it doesn't mean they need to pay more. This is our problem, essentially. Um, and so with with that model, growers are able to pay similar prices to what they're used to paying. We're, we might not be the cheapest, but we're also not the most expensive. We're in that range of what pollination goes for in every market that we work in. And yeah, like I said, the beekeepers are able to make sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot more money than what they were able to achieve on their own. And the growers receive superior pollination. I think Shelby touched on it a little bit earlier, but there's a huge difference in the output that a strong colony is able to provide versus a weaker colony. If you take two six framers during normal pollination, they will. So on average, a six framer is going to do 500,000 trips to go out and pollinate. So two of them together, 12 frames, are going to do about 1 million trips. But then if you compare it to one 12 frame hive, that hive is going to do on average 2.8 million trips. So almost 3 times as much as the two six framers combined. So that's why we always try to go for the stronger colonies, even if it means a little bit less hives than what you're used to seeing out in the field,
Hmm.
less boxes, but you have more bees, you have more available pollination force to take care of your pollination needs. And yeah, that's part of the accuracy that we're able to bring with our tech and the ability to monitor the hives.
I imagine with growers who haven't been thinking about this, maybe some of them haven't, they just caught up with, boxes per acre. Now they're having to think about frames per acre. How do they know, like, actually, I want 12 or 14? It must be kind of a daunting proposition for a grower when you first approach them and say, how many frames per acre should you be getting? How's that conversation going? How are they adjusting to this kind of new paradigm?
You're absolutely right. It can be daunting at times. We try to be as supportive as possible, help with the education around that. But also in many cases, if a grower is used to just getting 8 frames per hive and 2 hives per acre, they translate it into 16 frames an acre. We'll just, and at least for the first year, they would want to go with that metric. And we're happy to support that. We're also able to provide some recommendations, based on the tree density, the age of the field, the variety of the trees, and so on and so forth. But yeah, at the end of the day, the number of frames will be dependent on growers' preference.
Shelby, you mentioned you're having initial conversations with the tree fruit industry in the Pacific Northwest and trying to come to that frames per colony and frames per acre is maybe a little bit new as that industry hasn't had this long tradition as almonds of thinking in these terms. How's that conversation? What do you see as some of the challenges or of trying to kind of rein this into our tree fruit industry?
I think one of the first things is I kinda touched on it before, is there is a little bit more swarm risk here. A lot of the most of the bees are coming out of California. They're a lot stronger than they were when they first came out of winter. So they get here, they get some good cherry, they get some good apple bloom, and they're gonna grow really quick. They've already started building a good brood, and they're gonna grow really quick, and there is a swarm risk, and my growers don't they want their bees in the hives, they don't want them hanging out in their trees.
Mhm.
So that's kind of been the first thing that we're looking at, like, it's gonna look a little different, and how that looks I would say we're not completely sure yet. Like, that's kind of the beauty of it being a new market and still having some flexibility to it. I also think that there's a little bit of lack of education within the tree fruit industry because we kind of do take for granted that these bees are all coming out of almonds. They're good, they're gonna be fine, and so I think they're gonna see, especially in some of the trickier crops like pears, there we are gonna be able to illustrate, like, there is a very strong difference. It's just gonna be I don't know that it's trial and error at this point, but we just need to every grower is a little different, and we're just listening a lot to what our feedback is and see where that niche is and where that's gonna fit in.
That's great. I suppose this is I was really excited for this interview because I can see there's just been an explosion in AI and sensors throughout agriculture, and it's to me it's personally exciting to see it come into apiculture. But it does in my mind, and probably for a lot of the listeners who are commercial beekeepers, uh, make them think about how this technology might shape beekeeping in the next 5 to 10 years. I'd like to hear from both of you and in sort of your experience with apiculture and pollination. How do you see this technology kind of as it expands and grows out and you sort of like draw the trend lined out? What do you see as being some of the big kind of changes in how this industry is running?
So I think it's no secret that the beekeeping industry and beekeepers in general have been struggling in the past decades, I would say,
Mhm.
couple of decades. We want to be the greatest supporters of the beekeeping industry. Definitely the beekeepers that work with us, but not just. It's a really good question how the industry is going to look, 10, 15, 20 years from to with yeah, everybody likes using the word AI. Uh,
Mhm.
mm, we all recognize that AI is really only doing its first few steps in the world, and we haven't seen anything yet. I don't think I ordered my crystal ball from Amazon the other day. It still didn't arrive, so maybe if you'll catch me next week, I'll be able to give you a bit more insight there. But the reality is that we don't know how the beekeeping industry is going to look, but we do know it's not going to look exactly the same way that it looks now. I grew up beekeeping. Family owns the largest beekeeping outfit in Israel, and I it was mind-boggling to me growing up in a very agricultural environment. Seeing my neighbor who's a dairy farmer, his cows are being milked by robots, right? Tractors are basically driving themselves for a few years now. Irrigation systems are super smart, and beekeeping is still, you know, we're using a smoker and a hive tool. The last great innovation was the invention of motorized vehicle. And as a younger generation going into beekeeping, I wanted something more. And this is kind of how it all started for me and I guess for BeeHero. But yeah, we're already seeing the change. We're already seeing some stuff happen differently. Right now, there's a huge, devastating hive loss across the United States, higher than anything we've seen in the past years. At the moment, nobody really knows why it happened, and we don't know if it will keep happening. There are a lot of different entities, governmental and others, that are trying to look into this. There's task force, kind of joint task force that we're also taking part of, and we're looking into our data to try and identify, when it started to happen, when were the first signs of this decline, where. It's really important to see if there's correlation between the different hives and where they've been a year ago. So we want to do our best to support beekeepers. Sometimes it comes with financial incentives and early payments or advance payments and things like that. And sometimes it will come in the shape of better research and so on. So I guess if you ask what is going to be the role that we're playing, we want to be contributing factor to the production of food, right? And it starts with the bees.
We had an interesting podcast earlier with Russell Highcomb where he pointed out the lower colony numbers and how high, consistently high almond prices rental rates shape the beekeeping industry in one way, and with losses and lower prices, one could envision, especially a technology like this, really kind of there may be some beekeepers that came into the industry at a time when the prices kind of could bear these operations, but they might be more competitive. I can imagine a technology like this may be helpful in the people who've been doing a consistently good job over time to be able to re-envision what their operation is going to look like. There may be some potential and opportunities for those operations to expand, even though it's a kind of changing landscape.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say Russell is a very, very smart person and a smart beekeeper. In my opinion, I look at what we created as an additional tool for the beekeepers. They have a bunch of tools. They have what they know. They have, obviously their eyes, their employees. We have a bunch of tools to help us keep our hives, right? And I think what we're providing is an additional tool. I think it's a pretty powerful tool if you know how to use it and how to take advantage of it, that can give you that edge. Yeah, it'll give you that edge to keep profitability. A
Yeah.
lot of keepers today are struggling with the profitability of their businesses, and anything can help. And this is part of what we're trying to do. Sometimes we're more successful, sometimes we're less, but we learn every year. We try to stay humble. We don't know it all. I think we know a lot. We definitely don't know it all. So being humble is important. We can learn new stuff every day from everyone. So
How about you, Shelby? You're starting to work in an area where, traditionally there hasn't been, such a focus on, dialing in the strength of colony stocking rate. It's 5 to 10 years of this technology sort of having, how do you see it playing out in the Pacific Northwest?
It's interesting. It's my crystal ball also is not here, but because I'm female, I'm better at knowing everything ahead of time. So I have that edge to me today.
Uh,
Um, I I think that it's really tough times in the apple industry and it's really tough times in the beekeeping industry. And so that makes it very challenging to be one working with both, right? Cherry industry kind of differs year to year. But there's a lot of interest on the grower side. And I think I'm finding a lot of interest on the beekeeper side because it's a differentiator. Like Itai said, it's a tool in the toolkit. The appeal is going to be different depending on the operation. Every operation is different. So the things that we can offer are going to be meaningless to some and completely valuable to the other. And it's going to be reverse for another operation. The stocking thing is just really kind of an open book still because like I said, there's just not it's been really interesting doing kind of market research and some grower meetings, and then as we've gotten into more intense meetings because a lot of the knowledge is just passed down much the way that, like Itai said, where like, "Oh, this is how my predecessor did it." And so there's always been data there, and there's also a drive because the tree fruit industry and has seen an influx of institutionalized investors come in as well. And so they're wanting to see data behind things, not
mm,
just, I know you know this, but why do you know this? And so that's driving a little bit of wanting more visibility and transparency. Nature has data in there. There's been data for years. Bees do what they're going to do, and trees do what they're going to do, and the blossoms, all of that hasn't changed per se, but the ability to see it now is. And I think there's a lot of different values in that from driving in different forces in the industry. And the apple industry is wildly different from the cherries. And like you and I met in a blueberry convention, and that's wildly different again. And so I think, like Itai said, us staying humble and staying flexible too, because we've spent the majority of our time in almonds, but it's very different. And so being able to have boots on the ground here and in all the other markets that we've went into and see like these are the cadences, this is why it's different. So it's very exciting,
mm.
but still very open.
I'm really excited, and I'm really thrilled that you guys were able to. I know it's the busy time of the year for you, so I really appreciate you taking time to talk to our listeners today. Thank you
Right
so
now,
much.
it's I call it mid pollination relaxation. So we're just after all the pressure, and now we're waiting for the hives to kind of, or for the bloom to be over. It's pretty much over, but we're gonna probably start pulling hives out later this week. So we have these few days, so you call us at a good time.
Oh,
Uh,
well, which begs the question, maybe before I let you go, how do you think almond pollination went in general? I know it's a huge area, but was it a tough year? Was it what are your general impressions this year?
I don't want to make any statements right now because it's still very early to really understand. We have used our obviously a lot of our in-hive sensors were in the orchards, but also some of our in-field sensors that we discussed earlier. So we're hoping to get to do some more analysis and know a little bit more. One of the other issues that we've seen, other than poor hive quality compared to previous years, and I'm talking about the industries
Yeah, yeah.
in general, a lot of the orchards had a pretty light bloom. You didn't see those. Well, you did see some, but in a lot of places, you could see how light the trees look. You can see through the orchard. And normally the trees are completely wide. You can't, like, it's something that you cannot miss. And this year, in many places, it wasn't like that. So lighter bloom can also point at lighter yield, a lighter crop. But it's really hard to tell right now. We'll have to wait a little bit longer before we can assess that. And if you, with your permission, I would like to add a few things to what Shelby just said
Oh, yeah,
before.
please.
So one of the things my dad used to tell me from for years is that in beekeeping and in agriculture, every year we work more for less. And we look, it's absolutely true. As I grow up and as I'm part of this industry here now, not in Israel, I see the same things here. And there's more population in the world that we need to feed, and there isn't more farmland that we can utilize. So we have to be able to be more efficient with our resources. We have to be able to use less and produce more. And this is part of what we're trying to do. Shelby said there's so much data in nature, and it's such a good statement. We're really trying to take what nature provides, combined with legacy beekeeping, legacy farming, and then bring the new age of being able to look at a very big scale of data. We collect over 30 million samples every day, right? Analyze that and provide some additional insights that were just completely locked. It was unreachable previously, and now it is with modern tech. So I think combining all those things together, because every one of those things has a lot of importance, and combining it together can help us all be better at what we do, more profitable, uh, obviously, and yeah, just more successful overall. And that's what we're hoping for.
Fantastic. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. This is really great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.